The guards pushed the human forward, their claws digging into his torn uniform. The corridor was narrow, the lights dim and flickering. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of doom. The alien soldiers laughed in their strange language, a sound that carried both mockery and cruelty. His name was Elias Kane. He was not a hero from legend, not a general of armies, but a soldier who had been caught behind enemy lines. He had fought until his weapon was useless, until his armor cracked, until his body was weak. Yet even now, with chains on his wrists and bruises covering his skin, his spirit did not bend. He kept his head high, refusing to give his captors the victory of seeing fear in his eyes. The guard stopped at a massive door of steel and stone. One of them tapped on the control panel, and with a deep groan the door began to slide open. From the darkness inside came a heavy smell, raw meat, musk, and the copper sting of dried blood. It was not the smell of a prison for men. It was the smell of a beast's den. The lead guard turned his yellow eyes toward Elias. His mouth stretched into something that resembled a smile but carried only malice. In broken common tongue he spat, "Let us see if the human can survive until dawn." With a shove, Elias was thrown inside. The door closed behind him, heavy and final, leaving him in shadows. Silence filled the air, but not for long. From the corners of the den came the low, throaty growls of living things. Elias's eyes adjusted slowly. He saw shapes moving, small but dangerous. 6 of them. They were predator cubs, the offspring of the alien war beasts used in battle. Even as younglings, they were not harmless. Their claws were sharp, their teeth gleamed white in the faint light, and their eyes glowed with hunger. The cubs circled him, their bodies tense. One hissed, another snapped its jaws close to his leg. Elias stood still, his breath steady. His training screamed at him to fight, to strike first before they tore him apart. But there was something else he saw. Their movements were wild, but not only from aggression. They were restless, uncertain, and above all, hungry. They were not monsters yet. They were children. Children born into cages and violence. Elias slowly lowered himself to the ground, careful not to show weakness, but not to show threat either. His hands moved gently, reaching into his torn jacket. He still had a piece of dried ration hidden from the guards. He had kept it not for himself, but out of habit. Soldiers always saved something for later. Now it was his only tool. He placed the strip of food on the floor in front of him and waited. The cubs froze, their noses twitching as the smell reached them. One of them, bolder than the rest, crept closer with its teeth bared. It snapped up the food and backed away. It did not attack him. It only ate, chewing with small growls of satisfaction. The others watched. Elias pulled out another strip, then another, tossing them gently across the floor. His voice was calm, low, steady, like the sound of a river at night. "I'm not your enemy. Not tonight. I know what it means to be trapped." The cubs inched closer, drawn by hunger and something they could not name. Their growls softened into uncertain whimpers. One brushed against his boot, sniffing. Another climbed into his lap, its claws sharp against his leg, but not cruel. Elias remained still, his breathing slow, his hands gentle. The cubs ate, then lay down beside him, their warm bodies pressing against his own. He could feel their small hearts beating, quick at first, then calmer as sleep claimed them. Hours passed in silence. The predators of tomorrow had chosen him as their shelter tonight. When dawn came, the door opened once more. The guards expected to see torn flesh and silence. Instead, they saw a man sitting tall, with 6 predator cubs curled against his chest, their breaths steady, their trust unbroken. And when the guards stepped forward, the cubs rose, baring their teeth, not at the human, but at them. The guards froze when they saw the sight before them. Their plan had been simple: throw the human into the den, let the cubs tear him apart, and return in the morning to find only bones. But the scene before them was nothing like that. Elias Kane was not dead. He was not even bleeding. Instead, he sat against the stone wall, calm and steady, with 6 predator cubs sleeping around him like he was their guardian. One had its head on his lap. Another had curled against his chest. Their sharp claws, their teeth, their wild hunger, none of it had harmed him. The guards hissed in confusion. One stepped closer, but the cubs stirred, rising to their feet. Their ears flattened, their growls low and dangerous. They bared their teeth, not at the human, but at the guards themselves. It was unthinkable. These cubs were bred to obey their kind, trained from birth to kill outsiders. Yet now they stood in front of Elias like a living shield. The lead guard snarled, his pride burning. This is trick. Human poison them, human lies. But deep inside a flicker of unease grew, for no poison could create loyalty in beasts like these. The guards left quickly, sealing the door again, their voices sharp with anger as they argued among themselves. Elias leaned back against the cold wall, his hand resting gently on one cub's back. He could feel the little chest rise and fall with steady breaths. He knew this was only the beginning. Hours later, the door opened again. This time more guards came, carrying long rods tipped with shocking coils. They shouted and jabbed the rods through the bars, trying to force the cubs away from Elias. Sparks crackled, and the cubs yelped in pain. But instead of fleeing, they pressed closer to him, growling and snapping at the rods. Elias's jaw tightened. His fists clenched, but he held his ground. He spoke in a calm voice, louder now, not only for the cubs, but for the guards as well. They're not your tools. They're not your weapons. They're alive. The guards did not understand every word, but the cubs did not need translation. They understood his tone, his steady voice, the promise hidden inside it. When the shocks grew harsher, Elias did something reckless. He stood up, raising his arms wide. Enough. The rods struck him instead, burning his skin, sending pain ripping through his body. He gritted his teeth but did not cry out. He refused to give the guards the sound of his suffering. The cubs screamed and lunged, snapping at the rods, shielding him with their small bodies. The guards pulled back in shock. Never had they seen cubs act this way. Never had they seen loyalty form overnight between predator and prey. They slammed the door shut again, their voices filled with rage and fear. When silence returned, Elias dropped to his knees, his body trembling from the shocks. The cubs pressed against him, licking his burns, whimpering with concern. He smiled weakly, his hand moving through their fur. "It's all right," he whispered. "I've had worse. I'm still here." The cubs settled around him once more, closer than before. They had chosen him not just for food or warmth, but for something deeper, trust. That night was harder. The air felt heavy with tension. Elias knew the guards would not leave things as they were. They had seen something they could not explain, and in their pride, they would not allow it to stand. Yet as he closed his eyes, feeling the steady warmth of 6 small bodies curled against him, he felt a strange peace. He had been thrown into this den to die, but instead he had found life staring back at him in golden eyes. By morning, the guards returned once more. They opened the door wide, this time not with curiosity but with weapons drawn. Behind them stood figures of higher rank, their armor shining, their faces grim. This was no longer a game. They wanted answers. And Elias Kane knew that whatever happened next would test not only his will, but the bond he had built in a single night. The heavy door groaned open again. Elias Kane lifted his head, weary but unbroken. The cubs stirred at once, growling low, their fur bristling. They sensed the danger before he did. This time it wasn't just guards. A commander had come. His armor gleamed in the pale light, marked with scars of rank. His 4 yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the strange scene before him. A human sitting alive among predator cubs that should have torn him apart long ago. The commander stepped inside, flanked by soldiers armed with shock rods and spears. He spoke in the common tongue, his voice deep and mocking. "Human, you're clever. You bribe beasts with food. You trick them with lies, but tricks end. Beasts obey us always." He gestured, and a soldier jabbed a rod toward one of the cubs. Electricity cracked, and the little creature yelped in pain. Elias's heart surged with anger. Before he could think, he moved. He pulled the cub into his arms, shielding it with his own body. The shock struck him instead, burning through his back. His teeth clenched, his muscles screamed, but he refused to let go. The cub whimpered, burying its head against his chest. The others circled him, their growls sharp and defiant. The commander tilted his head, surprised. "You protect them? Even when it hurts?" Elias forced himself to his feet, still holding the trembling cub. His voice was rough but steady. "They're not monsters. They're children. You don't see them, but I do." The commander studied him for a long moment. Then he barked a laugh, cold and cruel. "Children? They are weapons. Born to kill. You will see. When hunger grows, they will eat you." He turned to his soldiers. "Leave him. Do not feed the beast tonight. If the human is wrong, the beast will finish him. If not, we learn something." The soldiers obeyed, retreating with mocking smiles. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Elias in darkness once aggy. And hours passed slowly. The cubs whined, their stomachs empty, their bodies restless. They circled him, snapping at bones on the ground, but there was no food left. Hunger made them wild. Elias knew the commander was watching, waiting for the bond to break. His own body ached. His burns throbbed. His head was heavy from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stay awake. He reached for the cubs, letting them sniff his hands, letting them climb onto him. He whispered softly, the way he would have to frighten recruits on their first night of battle. "Stay calm. I know you're hungry. I know it hurts. But you're not alone. Not anymore." One cub snapped near his arm, its teeth grazing his sleeve. Elias did not strike back. He simply sat still, meeting its eyes with calm strength. Slowly, the cub lowered its head, ashamed of its own hunger. He stroked its fur gently. "That's it. You're stronger than what they want you to be." The others settled too, pressing against him, their growls fading into low whimpers. Elias leaned back, his body weak, but his spirit burning. The commander had wanted to prove the human wrong. Instead, the night passed and not a single cub harmed him. By morning, the door opened once again. The commander entered, expecting blood. What he saw instead made him pause. The cubs lay sleeping around Elias, their thin bodies pressed close, their trust unbroken. The human looked up at him, weary but unbowed, his voice quiet yet sharp as steel. "You see, they don't need fear. They need care. That's something you'll never understand." The commander's eyes narrowed. For the first time, there was no mockery in his gaze. Only unease. This human was not just surviving. He was changing the beasts themselves. And that terrified them more than any weapon ever could. The fortress was restless. Rumors spread like fire among the alien soldiers. The human had survived not one night, but two. The cubs, meant to be his executioners, now lay beside him like kin. Guards whispered in disbelief. Some said it was sorcery. Others claimed the human carried a hidden device that bent minds. But none could explain what their own eyes had seen. The commander did not like whispers. Whispers weakened discipline. Whispers planted doubt. He summoned his officers to the war hall, the great chamber of stone and fire. The crackling torches lit the stern faces of warriors bred only for conquest. "The human cannot remain," the commander growled. "He poisons the cubs with his weakness. If they see him as leader, their loyalty to us will die." One officer shifted uneasily. "Yet, Commander, we have seen with our own eyes. The cubs defend him. Even shock rods did not break them." The commander slammed a clawed fist against the table. "Then we break the human instead. We test him not with cubs, but with hunger and fire. If he lives, we will see what remains of his spirit." That night, the guards dragged Elias from the den. The cubs howled, snapping at the bars, their cries filled with panic. Elias twisted against the chains, desperate to stay, but he was forced into the open hall. His body was bruised, his burns raw, yet his eyes still carried fire. The commander stood before him, tall and unyielding. "You say beasts need care. You say they are more than weapons. Then show us, human. Show us how much you will endure for them." He gestured, and soldiers brought in the cubs. They were chained by their necks, struggling, yelping as the cold steel cut their fur. Elias's chest tightened at the sight. The cubs clawed at the ground, eyes wide with fear as torches were lowered near them. One soldier sneered. "If the human does not kneel, the fire will touch them." Elias's heart pounded. He could bear pain himself, but seeing the cubs suffer was worse than any wound. He took a step forward, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Don't touch them. You want to test me? Then test me alone." The commander's eyes glowed. "Alone, no, you chose them. So your pain is theirs, and their pain is yours. That is the bond you claim. Prove it." Two guards seized Elias and forced him down. They struck him with rods, burning electricity through his body. His muscles spasmed, his breath came ragged, but he bit down on his scream. The cubs cried out, pulling against their chains as if they felt every lash with him. The commander watched closely. He expected the human to break, to curse the cubs for his suffering, to shove them away in anger. But Elias did not. Between each wave of pain, he lifted his head and spoke, his voice hoarse but unshaken. "Stay strong. I'm here. Don't give in to fear." The cubs stilled, their golden eyes fixed on him. Their cries turned to low growls of defiance. Even in chains, they would not look away. The commander's jaw tightened. For the first time, doubt crawled into his heart. He had wanted to prove the human a fool. Instead, he saw something dangerous, a bond stronger than pain, stronger than fear. At last, he waved his hand, and the guards released Elias. The human collapsed to the floor, his chest heaving, his body scorched. But when the cubs were freed, they rushed to him, licking his wounds, pressing against him with desperate relief. The hall fell silent. Warriors who had come to laugh now stared in unease. A human, fragile in body, had endured fire and chains, and instead of breaking, he had risen higher in the eyes of the beasts. The commander turned away, his voice sharp with frustration. Take him back to the den. This is not finished, but in his heart he knew. Something had already begun, something no chains could stop. The fortress was no longer the same. What began as whispers in shadowed corners had now grown louder. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones about the human in the den. They spoke of how he endured shocks, fire, and chains, yet still stood. They spoke of how the cubs, born to obey only them, now refused to turn against him. Some called it a curse. Others called it weakness in the beasts. But a few, only a few, dared to say what none wanted to admit, that perhaps the human had shown the cubs something greater than fear. Elias did not hear these whispers. He remained in the den, his body scarred, his clothes torn. But the cubs stayed close, pressing against him, guarding his every move. At night, when pain kept him awake, he would feel their warmth and listen to their steady breaths. It reminded him of his old unit, men and women who had once slept shoulder to shoulder in war zones, trusting each other to survive the night. One evening, the door opened quietly. A young alien guard entered, not with rods or chains, but with food. He placed raw meat on the ground, his 4 eyes flicking nervously toward Elias. For a moment he did not move. Then he spoke in halting common tongue. Human. Why do they follow you? They should hate you. Elias looked at him, weary but calm. Because I don't hurt them. Because I treat them as more than weapons. The guard stared, his expression torn between disbelief and something else. Curiosity. Respect, perhaps. He left quickly, but the seed was planted. Days passed. More guards came, pretending to taunt, but their eyes lingered on the strange sight of predators choosing a man over their masters. The cubs had grown stronger, their teeth sharper, their bodies larger. Yet they remained by Elias's side, moving only when he moved. The commander grew restless. He watched from high platforms, his jaw tight. This was no longer just a prisoner in a cage. This was a challenge to his authority. If beasts could love a human more than their own kind, then what did that say of the Empire's strength? He summoned his council. The human must die soon. If we wait, his infection spreads. The soldiers already whisper. They wonder if beasts can change. They wonder if we can change, an elder warrior hissed. Then kill the cubs as well. End this bond. For a moment, silence filled the hall. The idea was cruel even for them. The cubs were valuable, future war beasts. But fear made leaders reckless. Back in the den, Elias sensed the storm building. The cubs were restless, pacing in circles, their ears twitching at sounds beyond the walls. He placed a hand on the nearest one, speaking softly. They're afraid of us, you know. Afraid because we proved them wrong. The cub looked up at him with glowing eyes, and Elias almost imagined it understood. That night, the fortress echoed with cries. Soldiers argued in the halls. Some demanded the human's execution. Others spoke against it, uneasy with killing one who had shown such strange courage. For the first time, division split the warriors. The commander, furious, decided to make an example. He would hold a public trial of strength. The human and the cubs would be tested before all. If they failed, they would be destroyed. If they survived, then even he feared what might come next. When guards entered the den at dawn, Elias was ready. He stood tall despite the pain in his body. The cubs gathered around him, no longer fragile children but growing predators, their loyalty written in every snarl. The guards chained him again, dragging him toward the great hall. But this time he did not walk alone. 6 sets of glowing eyes followed him, steps silent but steady. And in the fortress, whispers turned into something more dangerous. Not just doubt. The great hall was filled with noise. Hundreds of alien soldiers gathered, their armor shining under torchlight. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and iron. In the center of the hall stood a wide arena, a pit of stone where many had fought and died before. The commander stood at the highest platform, his 4 eyes burning with pride and fury. His voice thundered across the hall. Today the human proves what he truly is. No tricks, no lies. He faces the trial of strength. If he falls, the cubs die with him. If he survives, Then let the fortress see the truth with their own eyes. The crowd hissed and roared. Chains rattled as Elias Kane was dragged into the arena. His body was scarred, his clothes torn, but his spirit stood unbroken. The cubs padded in behind him. No longer tiny creatures, but fierce young predators, their eyes glowing in the firelight. They moved like shadows at his side, snarling at the guards who dared to shove him forward. Elias raised his head. He saw not only enemies in the crowd, but something else. Curiosity, doubt, perhaps even admiration. He knew what this trial meant. If he failed, everything ended here. But if he endured, his bond with the cubs would become something the aliens could no longer deny. The gates at the far side opened. From the darkness came a massive beast, fully grown, twice the size of Elias, with jaws wide enough to crush bone. Its roar shook the hall, making even the soldiers flinch. This was no cub. This was a war beast, trained only to kill. The commander raised his clawed hand. Survive, or die. The beast charged, its claws scraping stone. The cubs leapt forward, their small bodies brave but outmatched. Elias shouted, his voice sharp, "Back! Stay with me!" To his shock, they obeyed. The cubs fell into position around him, not rushing blindly but waiting for his command. The soldiers gasped. Never had they seen cubs listen to anything but their own masters. The war beast lunged. Elias rolled aside, pain searing through his body. He had no weapon, only his fists and the strength left in his battered frame. The cubs darted at the beast's legs, snapping, distracting, forcing it to stumble. Elias seized his chance. He grabbed a broken chain lying in the dust and wrapped it around his hands. When the beast swung back at him, he struck with all his strength, the chain biting into its eye. The creature roared in fury, thrashing wildly. The crowd roared too, some in excitement, others in disbelief. This was no longer execution. This was spectacle. Elias staggered, blood running down his arm. He knew he could not win with strength alone. He looked at the cubs, their teeth bared, their bodies trembling but unafraid. They waited for him, trusted him. He shouted again, voice fierce. "Together now!" The cubs leapt as one, latching onto the beast's throat, its legs, its back. Their claws dug deep, their growls sharp. The beast staggered under the sudden attack, its strength meeting the wild unity of 6 smaller predators. Elias rushed forward, chain raised, and drove it into the beast's other eye. The war beast fell with a crash that shook the ground. Its final roar faded into silence. For a moment, the hall was still. Smoke hung in the air. Blood stained the stones. Elias stood in the center, chest heaving. The cubs pressed at his sides, their fur matted but their spirits fierce. Then the whispers began. Soldiers who had come to see him die now stared with wide eyes. Some muttered that it was impossible. Others said it was destiny. But all had seen the same thing. A human, broken in body yet unbroken in spirit, leading beasts that were never meant to follow. On the high platform, the commander gripped the railing with rage. His voice shook as he growled, "This is not victory. This is corruption." But the soldiers were no longer listening. Their eyes were fixed on Elias Kane, the man who had walked into the pit with nothing and walked out alive. Not alone, but with 6 predator cubs at his side. And in that silence, something greater than fear spread through the fortress. It was respect. The fortress had never been so silent. The trial was over. The great war beast lay dead and the human still stood. 6 cubs circled him, growling at anyone who came too close. Their eyes glowed in the torchlight, not wild with hunger but sharp with loyalty. The soldiers who filled the hall no longer shouted. They no longer mocked. They only stared, for they had witnessed something none of them could explain. The cubs had obeyed him. They had fought with him. They had trusted him more than their own masters. Elias Kane stood tall, his chest heaving, blood on his arms and face. His body trembled from pain, but his spirit burned brighter than fire. He looked up at the commander who glared down from the high platform. "You tried to break me," Elias said, his voice low but carrying across the stone walls. "You tried to turn them against me, but you failed, because fear can break bodies, but it can never build trust." The commander's claws clenched around the railing. His pride, his power, his control, they all cracked under the weight of those words. He could feel the eyes of his soldiers shifting, not toward him but toward the human below. Desperate to regain command, he shouted, "Kill him! Kill the traitor beasts! End this now!" But the soldiers did not move, not one. Their hands tightened on weapons, but none obeyed. They had seen too much. They had seen the humans suffer pain for the cubs without complaint. They had seen him stand against the war beast with nothing but courage. They had seen loyalty that no whip or chain could ever create. The cubs growled louder, standing between Elias and the guards. Their small bodies shook with exhaustion, but they would not back down. Their message was clear. He was theirs, and they were his. Elias took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted before him, not daring to block his path. Each soldier lowered their eyes as he passed. Some even stepped back in quiet respect. The commander roared in fury, leaping down from his platform. His weapon gleamed as he charged at Elias with blind rage. But the cubs struck first. 6 young predators leapt as one, their fangs flashing, forcing the commander back. His weapon fell from his claws as he stumbled, disbelief in his eyes, and then, for the first time, the fortress saw their leader afraid. Elias did not raise the fallen weapon. He did not strike. He simply stood tall, his voice steady. You rule by fear. I walk with trust. That is the difference. The commander's breath came fast, his pride shattered. He looked at his soldiers, hoping for support, but found only silence. Their loyalty had already slipped through his claws. At last he turned away, defeated not by blade, but by something far stronger. The truth they had all seen with their own eyes. Elias walked through the great doors of the hall. The cubs followed close, their heads high, their growls keeping even the bravest soldiers at a distance. Step by step he crossed the fortress where he had once been dragged in chains. Now no one dared to stop him. The night air met him at last, cold, sharp, and free. He lifted his face to the stars, the same stars his people were under somewhere far away. His chest tightened with emotion. He was still far from home, still trapped in enemy territory, but tonight he had won something greater than escape. He had shown them what it meant to be human. The cubs pressed around him, their golden eyes watching the sky as if they too understood. He placed a hand on the head of the smallest one and whispered softly, You're not weapons. You're more than that. And as long as I stand, you'll never be alone. The fortress behind him remained silent, broken by what it had witnessed. Soldiers who once laughed at him now carried doubt in their hearts, and in that doubt the seeds of change had been planted. By morning, the human who had been thrown into a cage of predators walked free, not as prey, not as prisoner, but as one of their own.